once again, with building materials, save them. You got a piece of 2.5 foot long piece of 2x4, your buddy was doing a project, he's just going to throw away, grab that and save it. It doesn't take up much room. If you got some project where you need a 2.5 foot or a 1 foot long piece of 2x4, you're going to feel a lot better whacking that off and using a foot of that than you are cutting a 8 foot stud and turning it into a 7 foot piece of lumber that you aren't going to be able to use. Not for an 8 foot stud anyway. Also, if you keep these little scraps on hand, they make great blocking material. That way you're not tying up your jack stands. They make good wheel chocks. But anything where you need to block up a piece of equipment to keep it at a certain height, these pieces of wood come in really handy. And just for example, this piece right here, for various, I bet I've used this piece of wood 50, 60 times. You're not going to cut an 8 foot long 4x4 to get a piece like that. You just aren't going to be able to bring yourself to do it. But little scraps come in damn handy. Various sizes, and you even get the railroad tie size pieces. You just can't beat them for blocking up a... Something like this window box project that I'm working on. Yeah, you're going to make your first one for your prototype one piece at a time and get it done just to make sure everything's right. But once you got that figured out, cut all your wood, all your pieces at one time, all your side pieces at once, and all of your end pieces at once. That way, you're not constantly measuring and not constantly going back from one machine to one process to another. Get your boards cut to length, get your holes drilled on every single board. And then when it comes time to make, let's say you're making 6, yeah, the first one's going to go slow, but the last 5 will zip right together. Everybody's got their favorite way of doing things. My favorite way to store and organize sockets are with these metal socket holders with the clips on them. For 1/2 inch and 3/8 sockets, I think they're unbeatable. However, for 1/4 inch sockets, they are absolutely worthless. One of two things happens with them. Either this clip on here, it will not hold the socket tight enough, or it holds them too tight, and they also have a tendency to just fall off the bar. For 1/4 inch, they're just absolutely worthless. 3/8, 1/2 inch, they're fine. For 1/4 inch, you're going to have to come up with some other way of organizing your socket. I mean, I got these in a tray on a speaker magnet. By the way, a speaker magnet is a wonderful way to store small screws when you're working on anything. Sure beats putting them in a dish. You bump the dish, they go all over the floor. A speaker magnet's fairly heavy. You bump that, it's not going anywhere. Then the screws aren't going anywhere. One other thing on 1/4 inch drive, I know a lot of people have nut drivers. I think they're relatively worthless because they can only do one thing. If you buy yourself a handle like this, you can put a socket on it and you can do the job of a whole set of nut drivers. I just think it's a lot better way to go. A nut driver ends up being a thing where you have a whole set, but where you need to use the 1/4 inch, you can't find the 1/4 inch. This really goes a long way to alleviating that problem, particularly if you have several sets of 1/4 inch drive sockets. Old antifreeze jugs with the top cut, side cut off them. They make darn handy things to keeping your fasteners in one place when you're doing a particular job. And free. You can get them as greasy as you want. They also make pretty good oil drain pans for things like lawnmowers that don't take a high volume. Just about everybody has one of these oil drain pans, but you really should have 2. One for antifreeze and one for oil. Because if you're doing something like an engine tear down, you're going to have to drain both your coolant and your oil. So, and the other thing is you got your oil drain pan, you drain some oil, you dump out what you got, but there's always that residual oil in there. It ends up collecting dust and all kinds of other crap. So if you're doing some situation where you're draining oil from a recently vehicle where you recently added oil, but you just have to do something like, just say, replace an oil pan gasket, and that oil's perfectly good. You put it in a contaminated pan, you got contaminated oil. Rig yourself up something where you can hang the pan so it drains, and then you can actually take some gasoline and wash out the residual oil. and it'll prevent having that just be a mess of dust and dead bugs and everything. And you got a dirty oil pan, the oil goes in there, it's shot. There's not going to be any reuse in that. So keep your oil drain pan clean. It's going to just be a lot nicer to work with. And if you're in a situation where you can reuse that oil again, you know, you'll have the ability to do so. Carb cleaner and brake cleaner. Make sure you have at least 4 cans each of that. Once again, store tools that are used on the same type of job, store them together. You got a tubing cutter. Guess where this is going? Once again, don't fall victim of being a tool snob. For the longest time, you know, when it came to floor jacks, I had to have the big one, you know, the 2.5 ton. Well, my stepson came across this small jack and the smaller sets of jack stands, and let me tell you, for small cars and working on mowers, four-wheelers, things that aren't as big as a pickup truck, they are superior in every way. You don't have to jack things up quite as high to get the jack stand underneath it. And on these smaller jacks, out of the way, dog, these smaller jacks are just easier to handle. They'll get under smaller cars easier. And the other nice thing about it is if you want to lift up both sides of the car, you use one on one side and one on the other. A small jack is a great complement to a big jack. So my advice to you, if you own the small one, buy the big one. And if you own the big one, buy the small. Now, just about anyone can see the logic of having a good selection of your most common nuts, bolts, washers, etc. But you probably aren't going to be able to bring yourself to get yourself a selection of carriage bolts unless you use them quite often in your particular circumstance. So, in this case, you got some old carriage bolts for something you took apart. Save them. If this was a normal, you know, hex-headed bolt, you just throw them away because it's just not worth the time of having a bolt that's hard to thread a nut on. But if you got something that you're just saving just in case, you know, some night when the store's closed and you need a carriage bolt, well, you know you got one. Yeah, save them. They don't take up any. Look at this. I think I'm actually starting to make a little progress. Now sometimes you get sidetracked here. I had to go take my Honda for a spin. I know it's been using coolant, and checked her over, and it turns out that this heater hose right there, that heater hose is ruptured. And this is exactly what I was talking about. If you got little scraps of stuff that don't take up much room, that's the kind of stuff you save. So here I got a piece of heater hose that's going to work perfect, and geez, I'm not spending any money on it at all, but it didn't take up a whole lot of room in the shed, so it's kind of a halfway decent thing to save. So I'll get that replaced, and my coolant issues will be solved. As long as I was doing this, I got a light. Here you need an extension cord. On an extension cord, if your end gets boogered up, it's actually cheaper to buy an electrical box and put that on the end of the cord, and then you have 2 outlets. So if you want to use a light and a drill, you don't have to be constantly plugging and unplugging them. And as long as I'm on the subject of extension cords, if you're ever replacing a cord on a piece of equipment, tool, power tool, it's actually cheaper to buy an extension cord than it is to buy a cord, a replacement cord for a tool. So, and you could use a longer one. In this case with my table saw, you know, it's convenient to have a longer cord. So if you ever need to replace a cord, consider buying an extension cord, and then you can just lop off the end of it, the female end, and you can save that, and that comes in handy for things sometimes, like if you have to replace a female end on a cord. If you have an older roll of masking tape where you cannot pull off the end of it without it ripping, and you don't want to go to the store to buy a new roll, check this out. If you take this masking tape, you put it in the microwave for like 30 seconds here. if you put a roll of masking tape in a microwave for about 30 seconds, then then the roll will just pull right off. If you're going to be doing any amount of working on cars, you're inevitably going to need cotter pins. And rather than hunting around for one lane here or there, just bite the bullet and buy the kit, the assortment, so you'll never have to worry about not having them on hand. The same is true for other things like grease fittings, snap rings, any type of little fastener that you use quite often. You don't want to spend more time looking for a fastener than you do doing the job. So when you got these assortments, they're fairly cheap, just buy them. Antiseize compound, absolute must-have in the shop. Particularly any bolt that you're putting into like an engine block or any type of blind hole. You don't want to have them bolts snapping off if you ever want to take it apart. But just about anything that I take apart, I put antiseize compound on. Lug nuts, you name it. It's just going to save you a whole bunch of troubles down the road. Definitely stuff you want to keep. When it comes to antifreeze, make sure you buy the full strength. They'll have ready to use or full strength. Get the full strength. Otherwise you're paying for just water. And then take an old jug that you emptied out and fill that half full of water. And then fill the other half full of your full strength antifreeze. And then when you have once you fill that up to the top, your full strength one will be half full. And then you fill that to the top of water. And then you'll have 2 jugs of 50-50 antifreeze is what it should be. And make sure you take a marker and write 50-50 on it, because it's darn hard to tell whether it's full strength or 50-50 just by looking at it. So make sure you do that. You ever notice when you put on a new, actually when you're taking off the radiator hose or a heater hose that's been on there for quite some time, it's just about impossible to get off. What I always do is I always take a little bit of grease and I'll either put it on the nipple or inside the hose. And that makes it not only a lot easier to put on, but it makes it a hell of a lot easier to take off if you ever need to take it off. Now, I'm sure I'm going to hear from people that say, oh, it's a terrible idea, the grease will soften the hose, blah, 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 you'll contaminate the cooling system. I don't know. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've never, ever seen a problem related with it.